We are back for the extended version with my guest, Sukhi Bal. Sukhi, we are having a great conversation over on the live show about plant medicine, about ground rules, about boundaries, all really juicy topics that I know our listeners are going to just lap up because it's so much great information. And as we're on those topics, I also want to just acknowledge you because what I heard you say on the live show was that you've been happily married for 15 years. And I think that's such an important distinction because oftentimes I think it's easy to glorify, like, oh, I've been married for 20 years. And it's like,
Mm.
okay, you have, and like barely liking each other or like actually liking each other. And so I think that there is an art to being happily married. So can you share with all of us what's the secret sauce? What's the secret sauce? Because I think all of us would love to solve the how do I have a great relationship answer, so that we can also have, long, fun, enjoyable marriages.
I love that question. Yeah, I mean, it hasn't been that happy the whole 15 years. I mean, we had some challenging times, especially for us. It was around, when we had three under four. It was a pretty difficult time because moms are oftentimes takes most of the load and of child rearing, and there's like a disconnect because husband's life still goes on, and he has to keep moving forward with his career and all the things, and mom's life is more multifaceted, and so that was not an easy time for us. But I think for us, what we did have, and what we've talked about this a lot, is we've always had like a physical connection. We've
Mm.
always been, like, for whatever reason, the very first kiss, I just remember I was just like, this is crazy. And so we've always just had that chemistry. Like, for us, it's been really important.
Mm.
And we always stayed in the same bed even when our kids were little. And we always touch feet even if we're not cuddling, and so there's always
Cute.
just been this kind of physical connection that has kept us. And he's very um obvious with his attraction to me too, and so that
Mm.
chemistry, like, he's always pursuing me, and so that's
Mm.
also something that's really keeps that spark. And then the other piece is that we are really both devoted to personal growth and our spiritual kind of evolvement. And even though that requires us to be less enmeshed, it also, because we have to be more sovereign,
Mhm.
we still find a way to stay connected. And I think that's really important, because there's a lot of people that are like, either one person is doing the personal growth stuff and the other isn't, or both people are, but they're kind of going in different directions.
Right.
And, I mean, I'm not one to judge at all, because it's like, we all just have a different path, and some relationships are not meant to be forever. And
Mm.
at the same time, there is certain energies and elements of a relationship that keep that connection going, even 15 years later. And
Yeah.
so that those two pillars for us specifically is just like that, we've kept that physical intimacy and connection alive all these years. And also, and that attraction and that polarity that I spoke of too, of, that masculine and feminine polarity, where, he is pursuing me and making me feel cherished. And
Yeah.
I am, holding space for him to know that, like, I got him. I think he's so smart and intelligent, and that, like, I'm here to support. And so we hold those roles in our relationship, and like, not perfectly, and we certainly come up with our like trauma responses all the time, but we've been so devoted to working on those ourselves
Mm.
that I think that's what keeps us really connected. I don't know. I mean, I got lucky in some ways. I feel like I didn't, it didn't look like maybe it was the perfect match, but it felt like it inside.
Mm. So
And
good.
I couldn't explain that. And, he couldn't
Yeah.
explain that. It just felt like home. And so, Yeah. So we've been.
I love that. I love that. I mean, I think partnership is where you should feel like home,
Mm-hmm.
and I can reflect back on my last relationship and say so clearly that because I was actually wanting to be away from home, that was a great indicator for me that there was some misalignment. And that's because that's exactly how I described it is I want to be able to come home and feel like I want to stay home.
Mm-hmm.
And that was such, so it's such an interesting it's interesting to hear you use that languaging because I can really resonate with that in a deep way.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like so often, we also can get into a rhythm, right? After you've been married for 15 years, there is somewhat of a rhythm, right? And there's certain roles that I think you kind of naturally take on. Like they're just you have kids. So I think there's some natural things that probably happen there. Maybe one of you is more of the disciplinarian than the other, or one of you is like the easier parent in some way. So when that happens, when we kind of get into this, rhythm, what do you suggest for people who feel like, man, my relationship is just sort of like stagnant?
Mm-hmm.
And we know that unfortunately with stagnancy, that can also mean it can dry up really fast.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some ways that you've seen people revive relationships out of stagnancy? Like how can someone show up differently? What's a methodology that you could share with us today that would be, helpful for someone that's really struggling with that right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it's like it's having that shared language is really important to have, and for someone, if like I had to renegotiate my role in the relationship too, because there's
Mm,
a time where I was really just doing all the caretaking for everybody, right? And it enabled my husband to be out in the world in a bigger way because I was holding down the fort. But then at some point, it's like it was time for renegotiation because I needed to be doing my work in the world as well, and so having that communication to be able to share that, and the truth is like for a woman and for a husband, like they're and holding this for each other is like he wanted me to be happy. That's his deepest desire, is for him to
right.
be able to know that he is doing everything he can for me to be happy. And really that even when his trauma responses or his conditioning or his all the other stuff that gets in the way, was kind of resisting my boundaries or changing of my role, it's like I know that's not actually him, and
Mm,
holding that for him and knowing that, okay, I'm on this path to carve out a new, role in the world and in my family. And I know he is wanting that even more than I want it for myself. Like he wants that for me, but
yeah.
his other shit just gets in the way because that's we're humans, and that's just the thing about
Right.
it. So even just holding that and knowing that and naming that for him too, like me
Hmm.
seeing him in that light and saying, I know you actually really want me to do this, but you're resisting when I'm like asking for this or whatever it is. And so like him still holding him in high regard, I think is really important for him to be able to keep that energy and that solidness to be able to lean into the changes. And I mean, this is just an aside, but it's kind of relates to our conversation before, is like MDMA has been really like a useful tool for
Mm,
our coupleship, and it's allowed us to, like, how I was talking about that trauma response goes online a lot of times when we're trying to have these conversations, our nervous system is activated and we are feeling at threat. But the way that MDMA works with our limbic system is that it actually calms everything down, so that's the reason why it's so effective for PTSD, is
mm,
because when people are flooded by their nervous system, they can't integrate and process and move through these feelings. So with the MDMA, they're able to stay in their body and actually process things through to a healing place.
mm,
And I feel like that shows up so much in relationships. It's like, and so you never get to work things out because one person's trauma response gets triggered, and then their trauma response triggers the other person's
Right.
trauma response, and you're both just in trauma response and actually can't get to the work and can't get to that place of seeing each other in our highest selves. And
Mm-hmm.
so utilizing MDMA and like couples work is something that I'm super like an advocate for and passionate
Mm-hmm.
around, because I just have seen how it's worked in our relationship.
Yeah.
And it's like again create it in like a almost like a ceremonial kind of space, and
Container.
oftentimes it's usually around our anniversary.
Cute.
So that's a way that we've really been able to deepen our connection, deepen our growth, make commitments, and actually shift and have like, again, that pattern disruption of like, hey, we just had this transformational experience together where we got to be so truthful and vulnerable and loving and compassionate to ourselves and to each other. And it becomes like a new, like, set point,
Yes.
because it's sometimes just hard to break out of patterns. It's just hard to like be vulnerable with your partner if you haven't been vulnerable for a long time.
Right. Right. Or if that's not your norm,
Yeah.
just like we were talking before about how, what if you haven't had boundaries and then suddenly you're showing up and
Mhm.
you're like, hello, everyone, I have boundaries.
Mhm.
Everyone's like, we don't believe you because you've never had boundaries. So I think that that's true in relationships, right? When we're trying to show up. And one thing we were talking about also was about how, people do go into sometimes like a plant medicine ceremony and they think, oh, I came for the weekend and I'm all healed. It's all done. And they forget, like, the example I love to give people is we're all caterpillars that are trying to get to our chrysalis stage so that we can become our butterflies. But when we emerge as the butterfly, if we don't practice flapping our wings and
Mhm.
if we don't practice not continuing to act like a caterpillar, we're just going to be a really pretty caterpillar with that walks around. We're never going to actually fly and take off and be able to actually be in our full butterfly mode. And that part of the work, I think, is the part that you're right, sometimes people can forget. And it's also a catalyst for the evolution of a relationship, and being able to get over a hump and get on the other side of something instead of getting stuck on that hump or getting right before the hump where you can just never seem to get quite over it. And I think that's probably very representative of lots of different listeners right now who are wherever they're at in those relationships, or in preparing for a relationship, in our relationship with ourselves,
Mhm.
right? Like, what boundaries can we also set for ourselves and hold to those boundaries? Because I think that oftentimes we think of other people when we're talking about boundaries, but also it's holding our own boundaries with ourselves, and the values that we're really gonna fight for, or the ones that we want to dive into, and to create lasting change and shifts and joy in our lives. What would you say has been the most rewarding part about the work that you do in the world right now?
Mm. Oh, yeah, I love my work. It's so amazing. It's such a gift and like humbling to be able to be like a person that people can share, their hardest moments with, and to be able to, share their tears. And so I guess there's two parts to it. One is really just it continues just to be allow me to be in awe of humans, and just like, wow, like, I can't believe how strong you are. Like, wow, that is just insane. Like, it's just that I'm continually in awe of my clients. And just also the practice that is evolved for me is really just that I love is just that being of service, and just being a channel. And even before each of my sessions, I'll do like a little bit of a prayer, and just, ask for myself to just be a channel, and to be able to be a mirror, and to be able to serve this client in their highest good, and really to be able to, yeah, and so that's always my intention, and I do that before every single session, because that's it just feels like a higher calling. And it's beautiful, because then I can follow my natural curiosity as it shows, and it'll take us in beautiful places. And I really feel like it's guided by this person's inner healer, really. And
Yeah.
I'm just allowing myself to be available to that. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, those are the pieces that I just am like in, yeah, just the awe of humans and all my clients, like, oh my gosh, they're so amazing. And they make perfect sense. You know, everybody makes sense. Like, it's just like, you know, when I actually hear their, you know, childhood stories or what's happened to them in their life, I'm like, oh my gosh, of course, this is what's been going on for you. Like, it makes so much sense. And
Yeah.
I'm so excited to be able to like introduce them to the capacity that they have inside of themselves if they've never been able to know that.
Right, to tap in. Yeah, I love that so much. This brings me joy because I do the same thing. I have the same practice where I say a
Mm.
little prayer before I meet with a client, and I do it before every show. And I oftentimes it's my creative director is almost the first one that listens to every like at least every taped show. She's the very first one that gets kind of first dibs on it. And sometimes I'll send her a message and I'm like, "Oh, how'd that go?" And she'll be like, "Oh my god, this was the best episode." Or she'll share some reflection with me, and I'll just go, "Oh, look at that," and sometimes it's just knowing. It's like, okay, how can I be the channel, how can I be the vessel, and
Hmm.
allow whatever's supposed to come out and bless someone else in whatever they're going through. And so it's a beautiful space to be in. And I agree, I love that I get to go, oh, I get to do this. And that's what I hear you saying too, is, oh, I get to do this, and it's so much fun and so much joy. Yeah, yeah, same, such soul filling work.
Hmm.
So I would definitely agree with that. Amazing. Well, Suki, if there's one message, like a universal message, perhaps, that you wish every human walked into the world just knowing,
Mm.
something that they, was the like an essence of their knowing, like what's that share that you would have for them? Like, what's something that maybe someone out there needs permission to believe something about themselves or about the world? Like, what would you say? You've got a lot of experience, you've worked with a lot of different kinds of people, and you have such an interesting lens as a therapist as well, because you also get to understand the origin story for a lot of people and why they do what they do. So what's that universal message? What's that thing you wish everyone knew?
I think it comes back to a sense of loving yourself just as
Mm,
much as you love your child, as much as you love your partner, and like that same level of grace that you give your best friend when they're sharing something and they're saying like, oh, I screwed up here, and you're like, no, you did your best, you're doing so well. Like, if we could speak to ourselves that way, because so much of what we go through in our life is like, there's kind of like, I see it as two layers. It's like, one, the situation that just happens to you and the shittiness of whatever that might be,
right.
but then there's this layer of judgment that we put on top of that, like, oh, I should have known better, this always happens to me, like, and that layer of judgment on top is actually, I feel like, what prevents us from moving through these hard times as we are meant to, which is that we go
Mm,
through the feelings, we have the emotions, we don't attach too much to the story, we just allow those feelings to move through us, and then we're on to the next thing. Like, we can move through things a lot faster than we think. And I
right.
think it's really the layer of judgment that we put on top that slows down the process. So if we could just like allow that layer of judgment to kind of lift and just be like kind and graceful and compassionate to ourselves, we
Yeah.
can move through stuff so much more easily. It's
Right.
just our natural way. We would like, just like a child, like literally, if you hang out with like a 2-year old, they'll be crying over one thing 1 minute, and then they'll be giggling the next. They're like on to the next feeling, and they're just so pure around it. And it's like, we also have that capacity, but we actually add this layer of thinking on top and identity to it. And then we're like, no, I can't be happy right now. I'm sad. Like, I have to stay sad now. Like, my sadness won't mean anything if I'm happy now. And it's like, that's just not how it how it works, you know? And so
Right.
just lifting that judgment, that added layer, like, we already go through so much shit in our lives. Like, just, that's just the nature of life. And it's like, and then we
Right.
add this other layer to make ourselves really get bogged down. And that, I just say, let's release that and just be
Mm,
kind like you would to your to a child or to your best friend or to, a loved one, that you would be like, give them the benefit of the doubt and be encouraging of them, and just do that to yourself. Like, oh my goodness.
Right. Beautiful, beautiful words. Well, my friends, this is our extended version. Thank you, Sukhi, for hopping on again after the live show. I appreciate you so much and all of your wisdom that you shared today. For those of you who want to stay in touch with Sukhi, just, be in more of her energy around her content and what her offerings are, you can go to www.sukhibal.com. That's SUKHIBAL.com. You can also follow her on Instagram at Sukhi Bal. That's SUKHIBAL. And with that, we look forward to seeing you all here again next time for another great piece of content and wisdom and inspiration. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you, Sukhi.
Thank you.